Welcome to the latest edition of Don't Take This as Gospel. I'm Mike Partika, and in the previous video and in the one before that, I was talking some about Mormonism, and especially in the previous video, there is a curious belief on the part of Mormons that the Apostle John is immortal, and it's based on a story at the end of the Gospel of John, John 21, towards the end. And in that story, John is identified as the disciple whom Jesus loved. Now, one of the things that we know about the Gospels, or one of the things you should know about the Gospels, is that none of the authors of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, actually identify themselves by name as the authors of those particular Gospels. The names that we have attributed to those Gospels are the result of tradition outside the Bible. There's nothing in the Bible that actually says these are the Gospels of these particular apostles or close companions of the apostles. Matthew and John were apostles. Mark and Luke were close companions of apostles. Mark ran with the apostle Peter, and that's correct. Mark ran with the apostle Peter, and Luke ran with the apostle Paul. So I've never really heard it questioned whether or not those authors were accurate until one day I was at a conference with Hank Hanegraaff, who is the Bible Answer Man, and he's been a radio talk show Christian question and answer guy for a long, long time. I think he's still doing that. I know there's a little bit of controversy surrounding him now because he converted to Orthodox Christianity and away from evangelical Christianity. But I think he's still got his proprietary name and show and all that. I haven't checked because I'm an ex-Christian, so I haven't really listened to all that stuff in a long time. In fact, I was very curious to hear that he had converted to Orthodox Christianity. So if he's ever in town, I'd probably go and look him up. Anyway, my point being, while I was in the audience listening to people get up and do their Q&As, there was an audience member who came to the microphone and he asked if Hank Hanegraaff had perused his website, which was called thedisciplewhomjesusloved.com. And I went to that website just recently. I don't think it's there. But back in the day, I did go to that website, and I got what I guess you could almost call the first Christian conspiracy theory that I've ever heard. And it was kind of amazing because I've never. You always hear just kind of the mainstream stuff. Unless you join a cult or something that has heterodox doctrines, you don't really hear some of the alternative theories about who wrote what. Or maybe if you read secular writers like Bart Ehrman, who is a professor of the New Testament, and he writes things like, did the apostles even write any of the books of the New Testament? These are all very, very interesting kind of alternate reality theories. It's almost like hearing about, alternate theories of physics, alternate theories of biology. In fact, there's a very good book called Kicking the Sacred Cow, which is by James P. Hogan, in which he takes six alternate views of science in various areas and kind of presents them up as if, what if these are true? And although I don't think that any of them have been proved out, it was still interesting to contemplate. And in that spirit of what if this kind of stuff were true, I want to go through what I learned from that website on thedisciplewhomjesusloved.com and just present it to you because, number one, I don't think that website is up anymore, and so that information may be lost forever. But and I think that's a shame. And number two, it's just kind of a fun exercise. It's kind of fun to see the alternative theories that people come up with that actually sound good when you first hear them, but later on you realize this probably doesn't wash. Because there's plenty of conspiracy theories out there in the world today with regard to and the 9/11 truthers, and then the Obama birthers, and all these kinds of stuff, the plandemic, and all the various kinds of conspiracy theories you come up around various days. This is another one of those, and there's another one that I had heard of before called the Christ Conspiracy. It was a book. I don't remember who the author of the book was, but it basically talked about how Christ was based off of various pagan mythologies, and the 12 apostles were the 12 signs of the zodiac. If I ever find that book in my library, I'll probably do a video on that. That was one that had me reeling for a little bit until I realized that they talked about the 12 apostles being the 12 signs of the zodiac, but nobody agreed which apostle corresponded to what signs, or even which of the apostles, because sometimes they would throw in Paul, sometimes they would throw in Judas. They didn't even have that down, so it wound up just being sketchy. There's 12 signs of the zodiac, there's 12 apostles, and they tried to link them together that way. I'm sure they probably did the same thing with the 12 sons of Jacob, etc. So anyway, all of that being said, this is just a little fun excursion, and I'll get back to the Mormon videos in my next one or two videos coming forward. I just want to go ahead and get this one out of the way because it's just a nice little fun thing to do. So without further ado, the disciple whom Jesus loved, who really authored the Gospel of John. So the authorship of the Gospels, they never call themselves out by name. None of the authors of the Gospels ever say, I, Mark, wrote this, or I, John, wrote this. So consequently, we rely on the writings of later Christians to tell us who wrote the Gospels. And the author of the Gospel attributed by later Christians to John only ever refers to himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved. So here's our question. Using only the internal evidence of the Gospels themselves, is there a better candidate than the Apostle John for being this disciple whom Jesus loved? So let's take a look at the internal evidence of the Gospels. There are only two men whom the Gospels say Jesus loved in a specific sense. The first one was the rich young ruler of Judea beyond the Jordan. So in Mark 10, we have this rich young ruler, and it said of Jesus, then Jesus arose from there and came to the region of Judea by the other side of the Jordan. Now, as he was going out on the road, one came running, knelt before him, and asked him, Good teacher, what shall I do that I may inherit eternal life? Then Jesus, looking at him, loved him, and said to him, One thing you lack. Go your way, sell whatever you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. And come, take up the cross, and follow me. So here we have an example. This is one of the two examples where it is said that Jesus loved someone. The next one was Lazarus of Bethany. Bethany also being conveniently located beyond the Jordan. So we see here's Bethany beyond the Jordan over here. And this is across from the region of Judea. I don't know why they have it spelled like Judea, but in any case, it's a similar area. So Lazarus of Bethany, also beyond the Jordan, it said in John 11 verse 1 and 5, Now a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Okay, so here we have another example of Jesus loving some guy, so especially loving some guy. And of course, it's not in, like, as far as I can tell, it's not in a gay way or anything like that. So what are the clues that may point to Lazarus? Lazarus is introduced in John 11 and raised from the dead by Jesus in John 12. And the last that we hear anything of Lazarus is in John 12, 10 to 11. The chief priests plotted to put Lazarus to death because on account of him, many of the Jews went away and believed in Jesus. Now, perhaps not coincidentally, almost immediately after Lazarus disappears from the gospel, the disciple whom Jesus loved makes his first appearance in John 13:23, where it says, Now there was leaning on Jesus' bosom one of his disciples, whom Jesus loved. Now, one of the arguments that was presented on the Disciple Whom Jesus Loved website was, why was there this extreme proximity between Jesus and this disciple? Well, if you'd just been dead and you were raised from the dead, well, wouldn't you cling to the person who had just raised you from the dead? I mean, you would not want to be out of this person's immediate range. Now, that's kind of an appeal to emotion, I understand, but that was an example of, maybe there's this close link on account of, oh my gosh, this person saved my life, literally saved me from death, raised me from the dead. I am sticking to this person, and I remember this from the website, like white on rice. So here we have the question. We have in John 12, 10 to 11, that the chief priests were plotting to put Lazarus to death, and then Lazarus is no longer mentioned by name. Perhaps he's mentioning himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved. So the question is it possible that Lazarus began to call himself the disciple whom Jesus loved to distance himself from the threat of death at the hands of the chief priests? Possible, maybe. Another thing is, was Lazarus the rich young ruler? Well, we know that Lazarus and the rich young ruler both hailed from the same area of Judea beyond the Jordan, and specifically Bethany, in Lazarus' case. The Gospel of Mark, which identifies the rich young ruler as someone Jesus loved, also contains a unique story concerning the events surrounding Jesus' arrest. So in Mark 14, we find, now a certain young man followed him, having a linen cloth thrown around his naked body. And the young men laid hold of him, and he left the linen cloth and fled from them naked. So this guy was following Jesus, and he's wrapped in nothing but a linen cloth. Well, why is that? That's kind of odd. I haven't heard of anybody else just going around wearing nothing but linen. Well, as it turns out, it was customary in those days to wrap a dead body in linen cloth for its burial. In fact, after Jesus died, his own body was wrapped in linen cloth. Is it possible that Lazarus was both the rich young ruler and also this young man who wore his own burial shroud since his resurrection? Oh, interesting. Guy walking around in a burial shroud. Maybe this was somebody who was raised from the dead. Maybe it was this rich young ruler, Lazarus. Well, could be. Now, a question of immortality. Now, this ties back to the video on Mormonism that I did, which dealt with the question of John's immortality. But here we kind of see how you can put another little spin on it. The Gospel of the Disciple Whom Jesus Loved concludes with this odd story about the possibility of this disciple's being immortal. So speaking to Peter, Jesus says in John 21, when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will gird you and carry you where you do not wish. And this is what he spoke to Peter, signifying by what death Peter would glorify God. Peter then notices that the disciple whom Jesus loved is following them and asks, what about him? And in John 21, Jesus replies, if I will that he remain till I come, what is that to you? You follow me. So if I will that he remain till I come basically means if this guy were to live until I came again in my second coming, which is the end of history, however long off that is, if this guy were to stay alive until then, well, what's that to you? And this saying of Jesus sparked a rumor in the Christian community at the time about this disciple whom Jesus loved, a rumor that the disciple neither confirms nor denies. So in John 21 it says, then this saying went out among the brethren that this disciple would not die. Yet Jesus did not say to him that he would not die, but if I will that he remain till I come, what is that to you? Why is it that there was this interest in the fate of the beloved disciple? Well, on the surface, it seems simple enough. I mean, Peter just learned that he would die a martyr's death for Christ, and he wondered, maybe, to distract himself from that news, or to learn whether he was the only one, or if he had some people, that he could commiserate with or glory with, depending on your attitude. And maybe it was just out of morbid curiosity. What fate did this disciple whom Jesus loved have in store for himself? What was he going to experience? Likewise, the fact that Jesus had said about the disciple whom Jesus loved that it shouldn't matter to Peter if this disciple lived forever would likely have sparked a rumor about the disciple's potential immortality all by itself. Little typo here, sorry about that. But what if? What if? What if there was a burning question in everyone's minds about Lazarus? Can a resurrected man die again? If the disciple whom Jesus loved was indeed Lazarus, then he wasn't just any disciple. He was a disciple who had been raised from the dead. Now, if you've been raised from the dead, can you die again? Perhaps Peter's curiosity had something to do with Lazarus' unique circumstances. And likewise, even if Jesus' reference to the possibility of immortality would have been enough to spark rumors about a normal person like the Apostle John, how much more would the gossip fly about the possibility of immortality in a disciple who had been raised from the dead? So, is the Gospel of John really the Gospel of Lazarus? Probably not. See, that's the thing about all of these conspiracy theories, whether it's secular or religious or anything else. They're probably not true. Well, why? Well, number one, every early Christian writer attributes this Gospel of John. I mean, you never have a Christian writer attributing it to Lazarus. You just don't. Second, the Gospel of John records that Mary went to live with the disciple whom Jesus loved, and Christian tradition records that she went to live with John. It's also clear from the similar writing styles that whoever wrote the Gospel of John also wrote the first epistle of John. They're very, very similar. They use some of the same kinds of phrasing. It's just kind of really sounds the same, like the authorship is the same. And no early Christian claims that that letter, which sounds the same as the Gospel in terms of its authorship style, was written by anyone other than John. And then finally, a gospel written by a resurrected guy would have likely been a bigger deal than one written by a normal guy, especially given this gospel's lofty spiritual content. I mean, this is the gospel that comes forward with things like, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. I mean, this is like spiritual revelation type stuff that if this is a person who had died and then come back, you could almost say that he'd seen this stuff on the spiritual plane in which he existed. But it never got attributed to him. So it's really shaky to think that that this was Lazarus rather than John. And also, there's just nothing to be gained by it. I mean, the only thing that you're doing is calling into question, the authority of the church in pronouncing this the Gospel of John, and doing it for no other reason than it sounds good. It sounds kind of like, ooh, what if? But you don't really gain anything by it. You don't really have any, you don't get any better sense of security. You don't get any better sense of authenticity. There's just really no reason to believe it. But, it's a fun mental exercise to explore things like this because, there's a lot of stuff surrounding religion that's cloudy rather than clear. And sometimes you might see a shape of a baby seal in the clouds and the other person might see the shape of someone clubbing a baby seal in the clouds, and it's fun to kind of compare notes and see, what you come up with. So I just wanted to give you this little excursion into the Gospel of John, see, about this idea that it was the Gospel of Lazarus instead, and also to preserve this little conspiracy theory for posterity, because I do think it's kind of a shame that website, I think, has gone the way of the dinosaurs. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little excursion into religious conspiracy theories with the question of who was the disciple that Jesus loved. And please do subscribe so that you can catch the next episode of Don't Take This as Gospel when I'll get back into the Mormon coverage. And in that, I think I've got one or two more videos to do on Mormonism, so before I move on to something else. So I hope you enjoyed this. Please do subscribe, and I will talk to you later.